The Euphrates River is gradually drying up. This is no longer a prediction. It is happening right now. And as one of the world's oldest rivers recedes meter by meter, things that have been buried for thousands of years are beginning to emerge. Ancient cities, stone roads, ruins of civilizations once thought to have vanished forever. At first, archaeologists saw this as a rare opportunity. Every area exposed beneath the river could hold missing pieces of human history. But then an unusual discovery appeared in satellite images. Beneath the newly exposed dry ground, researchers detected traces of a structure stretching hundreds of meters, resembling a buried tunnel or underground corridor from a very long time ago. When surveys were conducted, things quickly became stranger. Some passageways appeared to have been deliberately sealed. Some wall sections were reinforced as if to prevent anyone from going deeper inside. And the most puzzling part, these traces did not look like a structure that had been destroyed. They looked like a place that had been intentionally sealed. When scientists began digging deeper into the area, they believed they were about to uncover a lost part of history. But what emerged afterward led them to a much more terrifying question. What made the people who lived along the Euphrates bury this place and lock it away before they disappeared? The initial survey was only intended to map the areas newly exposed after the most severe drought in many decades. However, when high-resolution satellite images were compared with old terrain, data experts noticed an unusual detail. Beneath the newly appeared ground were traces of a linear structure extending more than 400 meters. It did not resemble an ancient road, nor did it match the layout of any recorded Mesopotamian city in the area. On ground-penetrating radar, this structure appeared as a narrow corridor running straight toward the center of the settlement. At first, researchers thought it might be a water supply system. This made complete sense as the inhabitants of the Mesopotamia region more than 4,000 years ago were famous for their advanced irrigation techniques. However, that hypothesis quickly ran into problems. Many sections of the structure appeared to have been blocked from the inside. Stone blocks were stacked across the passageways in layers. In some places, there were traces of additional reinforcement, indicating that the sealing occurred after the structure had been fully built. This left the experts puzzled, because if this was a transportation route or water system, deliberately sealing it made almost no sense. Subsequent excavations revealed even more puzzling details. In the area at the end of the corridor, the archaeological team discovered a small courtyard lying about 3 meters lower than the surrounding ground. There were no signs of daily life, such as kilns, storage areas, or residential zones. Instead, there were unusually thick walls in places exceeding 2 meters built with mud bricks, similar to those used in early Sumerian religious structures. At this point, some researchers began to propose a different hypothesis. Perhaps this place was never built to serve everyday life. Perhaps it was created for an entirely different purpose. That was the moment the excavation changed completely. Because from here, the story was no longer about architecture or urban history. Every trace began to point toward the same theme: death. The stone doors and strange carvings shifted the excavation in a completely new direction. What lay behind them was not treasure nor the tomb of a king lost to history. The first thing that appeared was absence. No signs of daily activity, no cooking areas, no grain storage, which was always present in ancient Mesopotamian cities. The entire area looked as if it had been left empty for a very long time before being buried. This led the experts to re-examine the history of the land between the two rivers. For more than 3,000 years, Mesopotamia continuously experienced wars, political upheaval, and deadly epidemics. Clay tablets from the Akkadian and Babylonian periods recorded times when the population declined, sharply crops failed, and many settlements were abandoned. At first glance, the site newly exposed beneath the Euphrates seemed to be another victim of that chain of disasters. But then one detail began to make everything harder to explain. In many rooms deep underground, archaeologists discovered clay pots that were still sealed. Inside were ashes, animal bones, and many ritual objects. What was notable was that they had been placed right in front of the sealed passageways, as if someone was performing a final ritual before closing them forever. Similar findings had appeared in some ancient temples in Iraq and Syria. In Mesopotamian beliefs, burning incense, sacrificing animals, or placing offerings before a door was a way to seek protection from the gods. However, those rituals were usually performed to mark the beginning of an important event. Here, everything felt the opposite, like a farewell. The deeper they went, the more researchers realized that this area was not built to serve daily life. The entire architecture seemed focused on an underground space. The narrow corridors led in the same direction, as if all converged at a central point that the ancients considered especially important. Then another discovery appeared. On many broken clay fragments, the archaeological team recognized symbols related to the journey after death. This was not entirely unusual for Mesopotamia. The Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians all believed that the soul would continue to exist after the body perished. But the number of symbols related to the afterlife appearing here was so high that it could hardly be considered coincidental. Gates, rivers, paths leading down into the earth, and figures of people moving toward a dark place beneath the ground. If this was simply the result of a plague or a war, why would the last people remaining here invest so much effort into rituals related to the dead? That question led some scholars to turn to the oldest religious texts of the Mesopotamia region. Because perhaps to understand why this place was sealed, they first needed to understand how the Mesopotamians viewed death. And it was there, among the stories of ancient gods and the kingdom of souls, that a strange legend emerged, one that had existed along the Euphrates for thousands of years. A legend about a gate that was never to be opened. To understand why the people living along the Euphrates invested so much effort into sealing an area deep underground, researchers had to look beyond the stone walls and archaeological artifacts. They began seeking answers in the oldest texts ever written in Mesopotamia. That was when a particular detail emerged. In the worldview of the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, death was not the end. After the final breath, the soul would embark on another journey, descending into a land beneath the human world. That place was called Irkalla, the kingdom of the dead. Unlike heaven in many modern religions, Irkalla was not a reward for the good. In ancient texts, it was a dark, shadowy realm where all souls had to go, whether they had been kings or commoners. The ruler of that land was the goddess Ereshkigal. One of the most famous stories of Mesopotamia tells of the goddess Inanna attempting to descend into Irkalla. To enter that place, she had to pass through 7 gates. At each gate, she was forced to relinquish a part of her power until she stood completely naked before the other world. That was just mythology. At least modern scholars had always believed so. However, when comparing those ancient texts with the carvings just discovered beneath the Euphrates, some similarities began to appear. Many symbols on the clay fragments depicted groups of people descending into the earth through successive passageways. Some images even showed gates placed one after another along the same axis, very similar to the description of the journey through the gates of Irkalla. Of course, this was not enough to prove anything, but then the researchers discovered another detail. In many local legends passed down along the Euphrates basin, this river was not only a source of life, it was also seen as a boundary, a dividing line between the world of humans and an invisible realm beneath. That belief appeared in various forms over thousands of years. Some places told of souls having to cross the river to reach the other world. Some believed that certain deep waters were the dwelling places of ancient entities that did not belong to the human world. Most of these stories were dismissed as folk superstitions, until the location of the newly discovered structure was placed on the map. The entire area lay directly beneath an ancient branch of the Euphrates that had disappeared long ago. In other words, this structure had once been built right under the water. That coincidence gave rise to a new hypothesis. If this place was truly connected to rituals related to the dead, why was it placed beneath the most sacred river of Mesopotamia? Was that merely a symbolic choice? Or had the builders deliberately placed it where they believed the boundary between the two worlds was the thinnest? No one had the answer. But the more they studied, the more archaeologists realized one thing. The people who lived here seemed not only to fear death, they feared what might emerge after death. And it was likely that very fear that was the reason the entire area was ultimately sealed. Because what was found in the deeper layers showed that this place was not merely a burial site or a religious structure. It may once have been the center of a much larger ritual. A ritual performed with a single purpose: to close a gate that, according to their beliefs, should never be opened again. If the corridors beneath the Euphrates were truly related to beliefs about the other world, then the next question was simple. Who sealed this place? And for what reason? The answer began to emerge when the excavation team reached the deepest area of the structure. It was not a tomb, not a storage area, nor a residence for the ruling class as many had predicted. At the center was a nearly 20-meter-wide circular space surrounded by thick walls and low stone platforms arranged in an arc. The entire area had many characteristics of a ritual space rather than a civilian structure. What was notable was the sediment layer covering the stone floor. Preliminary analyses showed that this place had once undergone a controlled burning. Charcoal plant ash and traces of aromatic resin appeared in unusually high density. These were all materials commonly used in religious rituals in Mesopotamia from the 3rd millennium BCE. However, what particularly caught the experts' attention was the way everything was arranged. The ritual pottery jars were not scattered like in an abandoned temple. They were placed in deliberate clusters, and many artifacts were even turned upside down on the stone floor. In archaeology, this action often signified the end of a certain function. Some ancient civilizations would smash god statues or bury sacred objects when they wanted to permanently close a temple. The deeper they went into the final soil layer, the more researchers noticed a repeating pattern. Everything seemed to have been done in sequence: lighting fires, offering sacrifices, sealing the passageways, only then filling in the entire area. There were no signs of panic, no evidence that residents had fled in despair. On the contrary, everything indicated that those who carried out this work had enough time to complete each step carefully, as if they were following a ritual that had been prepared in advance. That was the detail that led many scholars to propose a different hypothesis. If this was a response to war, everything would have happened in chaos. If this was a response to disease, the main goal would have been survival. But what was present beneath the Euphrates bore the appearance of a ceremony of conclusion, or, more precisely, a sealing ceremony. The strange thing was that this idea was not unfamiliar in the ancient Mesopotamian world. In many religious texts, priests would perform special rituals to close a space considered spiritually defiled or dangerous. Once the ritual was complete, that area would no longer be used. But there had never been evidence of an entire underground system being handled in a similar way. That was why the debate quickly split into two directions. The first group believed this place had once been the center of a deadly disaster. It could have been a plague-contaminated water, or the aftermath of a conflict forgotten by history. The final rituals were simply the ancients' way of confronting a fear they could not explain. The second group paid attention to the symbols appearing more and more on the walls: gates, rivers, and souls stepping into darkness. According to them, the builders of this structure did not believe they were locking away a location. They believed they were locking away a passageway, a boundary, a place where, according to their beliefs, the living and the dead had once been able to touch each other. The excavation beneath the Euphrates had now gone far beyond the original plan. What emerged was no longer simply the ruins of an ancient settlement or traces of a religious ritual lost to time. Each layer of soil removed made one difficult to understand reality clearer. The last people present here had invested an enormous amount of effort solely to ensure this place would never be used again. The problem was that no one knew what they were trying to prevent. The archaeological evidence allowed for many different interpretations. A large-scale epidemic could easily have led the community to isolate the affected area. Contaminated water sources could also lead to a similar decision. Even some serious social upheaval could be enough to cause the entire area to be erased from daily life. But the more they looked at the remaining traces, the less convincing the hypothesis of simple isolation became. The ritual jars buried upside down on the stone floor. The passageways sealed in stages. The layers of ash lying between the sealing phases. The entire process resembled a ritual performed in sequence more than an emergency response. Then another detail began to draw attention. On many broken clay tablets and remaining wall sections, the most frequent images were not of gods, armies, or kings. They were groups of people. They were moving in the same direction, going downward, disappearing into darkness. Some carvings showed priests standing in a circle around an opening. Others depicted arms raised high toward the space ahead, as if reciting prayers or witnessing an important ritual. The strange thing was that these scenes did not carry a sense of farewell. They carried a sense of prevention. The more they were compared with folk stories still passed down along the Euphrates basin, the more thought-provoking the picture became. For many centuries, local residents still told of lands that should not be dug up. Some places were believed to bring disease. Some were associated with mysterious deaths. Some stories even mentioned areas where the living and the departed no longer belonged to two separate worlds. Today, those legends are usually regarded as products of fear and imagination. But for ancient communities that had witnessed wars, epidemics, and death appearing en masse, the boundary between reality and belief had never been as clear as we think. Perhaps that was exactly what happened here. Some event had taken too many lives in too short a time, to the point where the survivors no longer saw it as an accident or natural disaster. In their eyes, some gate had been opened, and everything that happened afterward, from the offerings, the ritual fires, to the burial of the entire structure, all revolved around a single goal: closing it. However, when the complete archaeological map was assembled from satellite images, geological data, and excavation results, a new question arose. If this structure had been sealed from the inside, why did it remain hidden beneath the Euphrates thousands of years later? It felt as if the burial had not been enough, as if another layer of lock had been placed over everything. And that layer of lock was the river itself. After the final ritual, traces of this site almost completely disappeared. Those who performed the sealing left no clear records of what had happened. Over the centuries, empires rose and fell one after another across the Mesopotamia region. Cities were left behind, walls gradually sank beneath layers of silt, and memories of the place faded with time. Then nature took over. The Euphrates changed course many times in history. Each flood brought mud and soil from upstream, adding another layer over what once existed below. Over thousands of years, the structure sank deeper into the earth before completely vanishing beneath the water. From a geological perspective, that was a normal development. But when all the pieces were put together, that normalcy began to become hard to ignore. A carefully sealed site, a large-scale concluding ritual, passageways blocked from the inside, and then thousands of years lying quietly beneath the river. Coincidences that lasted too long sometimes forced people to ask additional questions. Did the last people to leave this place truly believe that stone walls were enough? Or did they understand that time was the most effective protection? Along the Euphrates basin, strange stories continued to exist, passed from generation to generation. Some river sections were regarded as waters that should not be disturbed. There were areas that local people had long avoided building on or digging in, even though no one remembered where the taboo originated. Such tales appeared in many places around the world and were mostly classified as folk superstitions. However, in this case, they appeared exactly at the location where a structure once hidden with astonishing effort had just been revealed. That made the hypothesis of a natural sealing layer begin to be mentioned. Not by the stone walls, not by the stone blocks sealing the corridors, but by the Euphrates itself. For thousands of years, the water's surface had hidden all traces from human eyes. What lay beneath was almost impossible to access. Memories gradually turned into legends, and legends eventually became fireside stories, until the river began to change. Prolonged droughts caused the water level to keep dropping. Ancient structures successively appeared in satellite images. Areas once covered by mud and water now emerged under sunlight for the first time in thousands of years. And it was that very moment that changed the entire story, because the debate was no longer about what the ancients had tried to hide. What made many people wonder more was another question. If the river had unintentionally become the final protective layer for this place, what would happen when that protective layer no longer existed? That was also the moment the excavation entered its most concerning phase, because the latest findings showed that the structure beneath the Euphrates might only be the tip of a much larger secret. What makes the story beneath the Euphrates special is not what has been discovered. It lies in the timing of its discovery. If this structure had been revealed 100 years ago, it would probably have been seen as just another archaeological relic among the countless ruins of Mesopotamia. But today everything is different. Water levels across the entire Euphrates basin continue to decline. Lands that once lay underwater for thousands of years are beginning to reappear. Surveys continue to record additional previously unknown structures. In other words, this story is not over. It has only just begun. There is an interesting reality in archaeology. The more answers are found, the greater the number of questions usually becomes. The structure beneath the Euphrates is a perfect example. At first, researchers only wanted to understand a structure that appeared after a drought. Then they discovered the sealed passageways. Next came traces of a concluding ritual. Then symbols related to the boundary between life and death. Each discovery opened up yet another new mystery. And that made many people wonder how many other things were still lying beneath the mud of this ancient river. Because the Euphrates does not just flow through one city. It flows through the center of one of the oldest civilizations that ever existed. Every meter the water recedes could bring with it a part of history that has never been told. A temple, a settlement, an ancient text, or a secret that time has hidden for thousands of years. Perhaps the most astonishing thing is not what the ancients left behind, but the fact that they are still there, silently lying beneath the earth through countless wars, empires, and upheavals of history, waiting for the right moment to reappear. And who knows? In the coming years, as the Euphrates continues to change, we may have to rewrite many things once considered certain about the past. What do you think? In your opinion, what were the last people to leave that structure trying to protect? A historical secret, a memory too horrifying, or a belief they were willing to take to the grave? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to watch more discoveries.